Problem tree analysis part 2. This part 2 consists only on showing some more details and some more instructions for developing your problem tree. Please note once more that if a problem disproportionately affects a subset of the population, please specify this population in the underlying cause statements. For example, as we have seen before, food insecurity is stated to be related to vulnerable pastoralist households in the Fafan zone, and the underlying causes of this are attributed to low agricultural yields for the agropastoral households, but also due to the situation of women in that area that have limited access to extension services and cannot improve their skills towards agricultural technologies. When thinking about the myriad of underlying causes for the key problems you have identified, it is also helpful to consider how limiting factors present themselves at various levels of society and identify these problems at these different scales. For example, at the household and individual level constraints, for example, behavior, knowledge, and skill levels, attitudes that limit the opportunities to achieve positive livelihood outcomes from these households, from these individuals in that region. Or at the community level, could address the reasons for weak community cohesion and the lack of shared values that hinder the delivery and maintenance of social and economic infrastructure. Another example of weak social cohesion would be there is in that region no shared labor. So this is a constraint for improving the agricultural output of that region. There are possibly also problems at the systems level, constraints that are external to the community, such as government policies, the delivery of social services, health services, for example, and market and other social forces outside the community's control. So paying attention to these causes, to these underlying causes at different levels of society, is a very good approach to ensure that you are tackling all the transformative resilient capacities of that region, of those populations. Now let's see a little bit more about the group work instructions. I mean, we've spoken about this a little bit, but just to give you a roadmap how you should proceed. So this is what we expect from you. We expect from you to create a problem tree. Once you have created an inventory of underlying causes, you could try to organize them or fit them in a, let's say, a linear or very hierarchical sequence. But this is not the right approach. As you have learned, many overarching problems like food and nutrition insecurity, they are typically multifaceted and much more complex than a simple linear cause and effect stream. Simple linear models rarely allow for rigorous problem analysis. The most critical and often overlooked element of project design. A more effective means of organizing problems and causes is to create a problem tree in the spirit of theory of change, an holistic perspective of the problems that are occurring in the region that you are studying. Well thought out problem trees represent a systems thinking approach to analyzing cause and effects, and in this light are extremely useful for the theory of change process because they help us to identify these multiple causal linkages that are non-linear, of course. While a problem tree is only one of several means that you could have of rigorous problem analysis, we elect to use this process in this course because of its ease in which you can transform your problem tree into a theory of change. How should you proceed? So, as we have spoken, you should start with electing an overarching problem in your region. You should then identify the key problems that are causing this overarching problem. And then if you, during your brainstorm, if you find out that some of these key problems that you were mentioning, that you find out that they are in fact contextual factors, you can put them right away in the bottom of your problem tree. And you go on further analyzing the underlying causes of these problems. So it can happen that when you are analyzing the key problems, at the end of your brainstorming, you will see that, oh, climate change is here, but climate change should in fact be down below because it is a contextual factor that the project cannot address alone. So you should put them in the bottom, and only afterwards you go on and further brainstorm on the underlying causes of these key problems. First, like I said before, use the information collected in your essay 1 as a departing point for your problem tree analysis. Identify the overarching problem and write a problem statement that includes what we have spoken about regarding the what, the who, and the where. Afterwards, identify the key problems, the broad conditions that are causing this overarching problem. After you have identified your key problems, go further on your brainstorming in your group to document the underlying causes on sticky notes or colored cards. This is how we normally do it in a workshop framework or in the classroom framework. Of course, now under these conditions, you have to be more imaginative on how you're going to do this, but it's the same principle. Everyone in your group writes concise statements and make clear if a project is impacting on some subgroup of the population. Just then go ahead and document the root causes of these key problems on sticky notes. Sticky notes is what we normally use in a normal workshop framework, which you don't have access to now, but you can try to work it out with your colleagues on how you should produce this type of brainstorming, how you should create an inventory of underlying causes on something similar like sticky notes, and start with this information that you have organized in the situation analysis and write each cause as a concise statement, making them as specific as possible, like, for example, limited access to business development training, etc. So if the population most affected by a specific condition is a subset of the population in the overarching problem statement, make it clear in your statements. For example, limited access to business development training for women. So it is important to underscore for which type of groups are you writing this problem statement. To make sure you include the various types of causes, systemic knowledge, skills and attitudes and behaviors and practices, it can be helpful to use a different color sticky note for each one of these different systemic or knowledge underlying causes. Or make some type of coding on the sticky note or on the statements you are making when working together with your colleagues. As your model develops, you will start to recognize if one type of cause has been overlooked or not, and you will see then if every underlying cause will fit in one of these three categories that I've said before: systemic, knowledge, skills, etc. And remember that sometimes some underlying causes are simply the result of systemic knowledge or behavioral constraints. Normally, it would be also important to write down the evidence base that is supporting the underlying cause that you have found out. When we use sticky notes, you would just write on the back side of the sticky note where this information came from. Did this information from water scarcity, let's say, for example, came from focal groups, or came from a baseline survey, came from which report did this information came, or from which referred literature. So it's important to keep track on the evidence that is supporting your statement about these underlying causes. This will help you to write the proposal later on. If you don't yet have an evidence base for an underlying cause that you are stating, but there is strong hypothesis and group agreement to include this underlying cause, use some type of quoting or on the sticky note to indicate that this is still an evidence gap, or you use some different color paper or different color text to emphasize still don't know the evidence from where you have this information about this underlying cause, and note this evidence gap in the running lists on, for example, a flip chart or in any other support that you can have for afterwards, going after these gaps that you still have on information on references for supporting these underlying causes that you are stating. So after you have collected all the underlying causes from your group, from the brainstorming of your group, you can start by identifying the contextual underlying causes that have been suggested as well, and put those at the bottom of the problem tree. Next, you have identified the key problems, and now you work your way down, organizing your underlying causes to demonstrate how they occur in a causality way. How are they causing these key problems sequentially or simultaneously? Always go down asking what are the key reasons for this problem to exist. And you just keep on asking afterwards as well. Is there any other reason for this to be happening? And you keep on asking these questions until all causes that can explain most of the problems are identified. Once a causal stream is in place, you can then make an analysis and recheck the causal logic of them. Just move down the stream and up and down the streams to see if they make sense, if they are congruent, if you're getting the picture of the problematic and the causality of these underlying causes. So let's say if there is a high prevalence of livestock disease in an area, you can ask, but why is this happening? Well, this is happening because there is limited adoption of improved husbandry practice. And why is there such a limited adoption of these husbandry practices? Well, because there is limited access to animal health care supplies. So deworming medications, for example, vaccinations, etc. And there is also limited knowledge of how to protect livestock health. And you could even go further and ask, and why is there a limited access to these things? And so on and so forth. So you just go down the chain, always asking, why is this happening? And it must make sense. The answers must make sense, and you must understand. And a third person that is not involved in your group work can also understand the causality that you are exposing here. After you have done this, just check the balance between the types of underlying causes, the types of constraints that you have suggested at the household level, at the community level, at the system level. You should have a little bit of everything, because in such a context, you just don't have problems and just not being caused at the household level. There are always community interactions, there are always systemic interactions that drive this community to a certain context, to a certain situation, which is causing an overarching problem. Once your problems tree, your causal stream is in place, just recheck again causality logic. Identify strong and flawed causal linkages. Check the logic order of your underlying causes if this is working. Just go ahead and make these questions for every key problem you have on your problem tree. For example, types of flawed hypothesis. Limited knowledge of conservation of agricultural skills is the only cause noted for low use of conservation agricultural technique. Knowledge is necessary, but is not sufficient. Other resources are as well needed, like sufficient human labor, physical resources, cultural acceptance of new practices, ability to take risk and try something different, etc., etc. So it looks quite thin, this hypothesis, this causality. Many other underlying causes could be the reason for low use of conservation in agricultural techniques. It can happen that you have the wrong causalities in place. For example, high pest and disease is not a cause of low use of organic fertilizers. Limited knowledge of conservation agricultural skills does not cause limited access to farm inputs. So these wrong causalities can happen. It can happen that you organized your problems in a wrong causality way. So you have to discuss this in the group if these things are making sense afterwards. And you change them, you correct them. The logical order can be switched. You could have switched the order of limited access to business development services and low entrepreneurial literacy. The logic does not flow here. It is the low entrepreneurial literacy that is being caused by the limited access to business development services and not the other way around. So once the logic begins to hold and you see that everything is okay, there's no more questions about the causalities and the ordering of the causality chain, you can start bringing your problem tree into electronic format. So this would be the normal procedure when we are working in the classroom. And there are several softwares for doing this. You can see and try this link here, but basically you will now most probably be using other softwares, given the current situation of you having to be working apart from each other on a platform of the university. There are also some tips that I would like to give you regarding very simple things. regarding if the diagram of the problem tree is too big and it's not fitting anymore on one page, you can separate the problem tree in different pages for different key problems. Just be sure to show how the problems link to one another across the pages. Summarizing, different groups representing different regions or working in different regions in our module may appear to have the same problems and broad categories of root causes, but the important thing is that you identify the context-specific problems and underlying causes, constraints that are affecting that region, the specific issues of that region. Don't forget that causes can occur at multiple levels, at the household, community, or systemic levels, and also they can have different forms, like they can be related to behavioral, to knowledge, or to skills of people, of actors, or they can have a more attitude-related form and also be completely systemic, just depending on the governmental institutions. So a problem tree will help us to visualize the hierarchy of problems and causes and also cross-causal linkages on a non-linear way. A problem tree which is based on a very strong causal logic can be easily transformed into a theory of change with a strong causal logic as well. So you can have using this problem tree or using the solution tree that we will derive from this problem tree, we will be then in the position of writing our theory of change narrative with the help of this solution problem tree that we will have for guiding us in our writing. Thank you very much. See you soon. Bye-bye.